While visiting my mother, who was here earlier, at her senior residence on a Saturday morning, I noticed what looked like a very lively party in the main social hall. There was a buffet with a lot of food and people laughing and talking to one another. So I asked the receptionist at the front desk, "What's going on in there?" And she answered, "It's a celebration of life. One of our residents died." Her response kind of surprised me. I thought, shouldn't people be sad that their friend or loved one had just passed away? And yet everybody in that room seemed so joyful. And the receptionist explained to me, well, she lived into her 90s, why be sad? We're celebrating her life. It's not like she was 30 and was killed tragically or something. That conversation really stuck with me, and it led me to think more about our Jewish approach to death and to mourning. Because in the Jewish tradition, we don't hold a celebration of life. We mourn. We mourn first, we can celebrate later. Because Judaism teaches us that life is sacred above all else. The principle of pikuach nefesh, preserving a life, overrides nearly every other commandment. And the Mishnah, Sanhedrin, reminds us whoever saves a single life, that person is considered to have saved the entire world. So to celebrate a death kind of risks diminishing the value of life, that very core being of Judaism. And at the same time, Judaism recognizes that grief has its limits. Maimonides cautioned, a person should not become excessively brokenhearted because of a death. The Talmud in Tractate Brachot even describes a situation where a funeral procession and a wedding procession meet up at an intersection. And the Talmud questions, which one goes first, the funeral or the wedding? And the answer is the wedding, because it affirms the centrality of life. So Jewish tradition does warn us against despair. King David in Psalms cried out from the depths, yet he also proclaimed hope in salvation. This reminds me of the legacy of Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav. He was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidim. He was born in 1772 in the Ukraine. He became one of the most original Hasidic thinkers of his time. He was brutally honest, self-examined, and a relentless searcher for closeness with God. And he carried a lot of inner burdens. He endured terrible tragedies, the loss of 2 children. He suffered from tuberculosis, which ended his life at age 38. And by modern standards, he probably was what we would call bipolar mood disorder. But instead of hiding his suffering, he transformed it into teaching. He named despair, atzvut, as a spiritual enemy and urged his followers to find joy, cultivate joy. His joy was not naive, though. It was the joy of one who had looked into the abyss and still chosen to dance. Even in the darkest place, he wrote, the smallest light can still shine. And his most enduring teaching that you've probably sung many times is the whole world is a very narrow bridge, and the essential thing is not to be afraid. So these Jewish responses to suffering are varied, but we are learning to confront suffering honestly through all of them. Take the book of Job, for example, where Job suffers greatly and his friends try to comfort him without great skill. Job wrestles with unbearable pain. Yet, in the end, he is resilient. He even protests his situation, and he makes meaning out of his despair. Rabbi Harold Kushner, who suffered the loss of a child, taught that while we cannot always control suffering, we can choose how to live with it. And Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, argued that even in suffering, we can find purpose through love, through creativity, and through choosing our attitude toward hardship. Let me share with you a very recent example in the New York Times that caught my attention. Ghanaian, Ghana-born Ghanaian artist Joseph Avuha Darko, launched what he called the Last Supper Project. At 28, he declared that he no longer lived to wish with the pain of his own bipolar mood disorder. He planned to seek euthanasia in the Netherlands. But first, he put out into the world that he invited people, strangers and friends alike, to invite him for a final meal. By August of 2025, he had shared more than 150 such dinners across 6 countries. Now, Judaism teaches us that our lives are not ours alone. They are entrusted to us by God. Maimonides wrote that the body is a divine gift given to us by God. So choosing to end life is a very troubling topic for us as people, and most certainly for us as Jews. It's not merely personal. It's a breach of our covenantal responsibility. But that doesn't mean we ignore suffering either, because our tradition permits us to refuse extraordinary medical measures and allow for a natural death, and we emphasize compassionate care. But we reject despair as the final word. And life, no matter how fragile, always has the potential for meaning. So even in his despair, Avuha Darko searched for connection. Through the meals shared with others, he echoed Jewish values: community, relationship, and meaning-making. We need to apply these Jewish values today, because both vignettes, that of celebrating the death of a 90-some-year-old, and Avuha Darko, the 28-year-old searching for its last suppers, both vignettes push us to ask, how can we uphold the sanctity of life through our Jewish lens? Because these values guide us to respond to very modern challenges. Not to be too political, but I can't help myself. Recently, Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, the one which is going to cause perhaps 17 million people to lose their health care, the one that's being fought over right now because health care will become unaffordable for so many. I've already, in my law practice, heard from many who are panicked about Medicaid cuts, about people who do not know how they are going to exist without the Medicaid that sustains them. It's not a Jewish value to be in support of a bill that takes away health care from millions of people and may cause the death of many. I have to also recall Senator Joni Ernst dismissing the consequences of the One Big Beautiful Bill by saying, well, we're all going to die. Thankfully, she's not running for re-election. Jewish law teaches us to reject such indifference, because cutting off care is not just bad policy, it's an affront to the sanctity of life itself. So a different approach to death. And back to my mother's building. I told the receptionist that I'd take a different view. Any death, even of someone who lived into their 90s, should evoke sadness. When one has died, a unique world is lost. I dislike the first response to death that people have. How old were they? As Jews, we allow ourselves to grieve no matter what age someone is. Only then, from the depths of sorrow, can we actually rise. See, there's a Hasidic teaching that if you want to throw a stone way high, you have to drop your hand really low. That's how you get the leverage to throw the stone very high. Same is true of grieving. If you want to get past grief, you have to let yourself drop very low so that you can rise up again very high. Returning to Avuha Darko, through his story, well, it's pretty complex, but it challenges us to reflect on the sanctity of life. Because as we prepare in these moments for our Yizka service, and we remember our ancestors, leaders, relatives, or friends who have passed away, we recall them with sadness. We do not celebrate death. We do not hasten it. Instead, we honor life. We have to be advocates for life. And it is our duty to preserve life when appropriate. So Judaism does teach us to grieve first, but also to rise high, to move from sorrow into strength, from despair into hope, from darkness into faith.